Hi guys, welcome to today's session on React.js Essentials. So before we start off, a few instructions. If you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A section of the chat on your bottom right. You can see there are three sections: general, Q&A, and DMs. So drop any questions in the Q&A section, and someone from our team will try to answer them. And if you have any specific question for the speaker, you can still drop them in the Q&A section. Yatish will tag them at the end or somewhere. So, yep. So today's speaker is Yatish. So over to you, Yatish.
Thanks, Rohit. I hope I'm audible to everybody.
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah. So I'll start sharing my screen. So is everybody able to see the PPT?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hi guys, it's great to see the good participation from you guys today. I'm Yatish Kerkar and I'm currently in the final year in the IT department. Right now, I'm the web developer in GDSC PVG COET. And apart from that, I'm also the general secretary of ITSA, that is the student association of our IT department. Apart from that, I'm usually very interested in stuff like mobile and web development, and I've completed a large number of internships in them. And I'm also looking out for freelance opportunities right now. So, coming to the main point of today's workshop, that is, what is React and what exactly does React.js essential means? So, let's get started right to it. So a lot of you guys must have already heard the word React, or you must have seen them on places like LinkedIn or in Internshara, or even on different kind of job portals. You'll see that a lot of companies are offering a really huge amount of money to hire people who are very experienced in React, or even to hire people who have barely like 2 or 3 years of experience in React. To quote an example, just yesterday, I think I saw a job post on LinkedIn itself where there was some Canadian company and they were ready to pay somewhere around 22 lakhs to 23 lakhs for the job post of a React developer with just around 4 to 5 years of experience. So you can gauge you can gauge how important or how significant React.js has become today right now in the field of web development, such that companies are really ready to pay you any amount of money if you can give them a very good looking website that has been built with React. So this is one of the very first steps that we will be taking today. That is, we are going to get started with React.js. We are going to see what exactly React.js is, and after that, we are also going to build a clone of a very popular website called Linktree. So many of you might already be knowing what it is, but for those who don't worry. I'll spend a minute to just tell you what that exactly means. So I know a lot of you have the question of if I know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, then why should I even bother learning React? Because React is a new library, right? There is a lot of things to learn in React, and it will take you a very long amount of time to actually master all the concepts that are there in React. So if you already know HTML and CSS, then it basically means that you can just build a website, right? Then you don't need to learn any complex frameworks, or you don't need to really study any libraries like Angular or even a library like React. But that is where a lot of people go wrong, because see, when you want to build a kind of a product for a company, the company will not be satisfied if you try to give them a product that is built just using HTML or CSS. And the reasons for this are very simple. For example, a company's website or a company's product might have literally thousands or 2 thousands of pages. Now, imagine if you yourself alone were to code around 200 HTML pages, or you had to code 2000 HTML pages. I mean, it would take you probably 10 to 15 years to, completely build that product. But when you're using a framework, or when you're using a very popular library like React, then the amount of work that you need to do in order to accomplish something, or in order to build that website, becomes very small compared to how much efforts it would have taken you to actually build that product using normal HTML, CSS, or even using JavaScript. Another reason is that when you're coding in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you need to write down a lot of code to do something that's very basic. For example, if you need something to happen when you click a button in JavaScript, you will need to write a minimum line, 5 to 6 lines of code just to get that one thing working. But let's say you're instead using React to do this, then all it takes is just a single line and some knowledge of JavaScript to do the entire task that would have otherwise taken you almost 5 to 10 minutes. Another important concept that React.js includes is the concept of something called as a JSX. So here you can see that on the right side we have a website, and on the left side we have two basically you can say flow charts that lead to the website. On the top we have the normal web development. So we have people here right now from FE, SE, and the third year as well. So I'm pretty sure that all of you guys are aware of what exactly goes into building of a website. So you know that we have HTML, which just defines the basic structure of the website. You have JavaScript, which gives the website some kind of a behavior, and then you also have CSS, which is nothing but cascading style sheets. That is, you can use CSS to make your website look really good. So React basically uses these three main pillars of web development, except that in the case of React, instead of actually coding HTML and JavaScript in the two different files, you just combine them into one file, and this is basically called JSX. The For those who are interested, JSX is a short form for JavaScript extensible markup. So what this basically means is that in a JSX file you write JavaScript, but that JavaScript is composed of nothing but functions. So for those of you who love Python, or for those of you who prefer C++, you guys know that function is nothing but a block of code that returns some kind of a value. So in the case of React, JSX is nothing but JavaScript functions that return HTML instead of returning some kind of a value. So we'll see that in just a few more moments. And when you combine this JSX with plain normal CSS, you get what is called essentially as a React code. Now, in the our browser, it cannot really understand this React code. Our browser only understands three things, that is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So, in order for our browser to understand this stuff very clearly, we need something called as a transpiler. So the job of this transpiler is pretty simple. Whatever JSX that we had written, it simply again segregates this JSX back into HTML and JavaScript. So this is exactly how React works under the hood. You write JSX, you write CSS, then you combine both of it together, and then you simply give it to the transpiler. The transpiler will compile it back into HTML, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And once that's done, then you have your website done. So a lot of you might be also having the question that if I can write HTML separately and I can write JavaScript separately, then why do I even really need a transpiler, right? Because the JSX that I'm writing is eventually just going to get converted back into HTML and JavaScript. So that is where the concept of components in React really comes into picture. So let's say you're building a website in HTML, right? So the main problem that you might face there is that if you have a lot of functionalities that are scattered in your website, it will be really difficult for you to code each of these functionalities separately. Why? Because all of these functionalities are included in the same HTML file. So if one thing goes wrong, everything goes wrong. But in the case of React, what we generally do is that we divide our app into a number of components. So, what a component essentially means is that it's a bunch of code that is related to only one functionality of your website. So, one component is really independent of another component. The functionality or working of that component won't really affect the functionality and working of another component. So that way, if you have like 5 people working on your website, then you can just easily assign each person to work on one component, and that way when one person messes up, which usually just happens, uh, it won't completely mess up your whole website. Your website will still be working, and only the component that got messed up will be the one that will not be working. So with these concepts in place, I think we are quite ready to start with the hands-on coding of our Linktree clone. So before we even start that, I just want you guys to show exactly what Linktree is. So I've sorry, I've opened up this website called Wait, I'll just paste this in the chat box for those who want it. Okay, so Linktree is basically a website where you can host a large number of links, basically. So a link can be anything. It can be a link to your Instagram account. It can be a link to your GitHub repository. It can be anything that you want people to know about you. So this is the link tree of GDSC PVG That is the our club which is conducting this event, right? So first you can see the first link is there. That is the React.js Essentials. This link is nothing but the link to today's webinar that we are conducting right now. So this is essentially what we are going to be building. We are going to be building a clone of Linktree. So to get started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a new tab and I'm going to type in this site called codesandbox.io. I'll share the link also in the chat box. So once you go here, you'll see that this is essentially Code Sandbox is essentially a website where you can code in any language that you want, but you don't want to do it on your PC. So this enables you to directly just do it through your browser. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here which says start coding for free, and when I do that, it will give me an option of creating a sandbox here. That is the blue button. So click on this blue button here, and you see that there is an option here called React. So under official templates, you select the first option, that is React. So when you click on that, it will take around 5 to 10 seconds, but it will kind of give you this interface where on the left side you have some place to write your code, and on the right side you can see that there is a small window for a browser. So can you all just put yes in the chat box once you have reached to this stage? Okay. Okay, great. So now at this point, it might ask you to, sign up to save your work. So if you want to do it, you can do it. Use your Google account or GitHub. But if you don't, I mean, it's really fine. But you will not be able to view this again once you close your browser window. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly sign in with GitHub here. So you can also do it with Google. It's just that I already have my GitHub account registered, so I'll just use that. Great. So you can see that the message has now disappeared on the top. So yeah, before we even start to code, I just want to take some time out to explore what we already have got here, right? So the first thing that we are going to do is actually you can see that we have a very small space left here to write the code actually. So I want to open this browser in the new window. So I'm going to click on this option on the extreme right, which says open in a new window. And when you do that, it will just basically open up in a new window. So you can see that what we were seeing here is now here, but in a bigger size. And in order to close this right side of the window, you can see there is a small icon here that looks like a video player. It says toggle preview. So just click on that and that will disappear. So can you put a yes once you're done with this too? Okay, great. So let's continue. So if you go on the left side here, you can see that we have three folders or files that you can see. The first one is something called as a public folder. So if you click on that, it will open up. And inside that, you can see that there is a file called index.html. So just click on that. So here you can see that it's a very small HTML file, right? barely around 40 lines, and most of it is just comments. So while this might seem very normal, there is one important thing that you need to take notice of here, which is here on line 30. You'll see that there is a div, and the div has a ID called root. So we'll exactly see why there is a div called root in just a few moments. So just remember this, on line 30 there is a div with the ID called root. Now, next, if we go into the source folder, you can see that again in the source folder we have three files. One is a styles.css file. So most of you are already aware, right, of what CSS is. So I'm not going to go into much detail here. So this is basically just a CSS file that we will be using to style our React project. After that, the next important file is that is called as index.js. So I just want you to all guys to just pause for a minute and read out the 10 lines of code that are written here. It might be a little bit confusing if you have never used JavaScript before, but just try to go through it for 1 second. Okay, so for the starting, let's just ignore these three lines that are there on the top, and let's focus on the sixth line that is here. So what we are doing here basically is that we are declaring a variable, and the name of the variable is called a root element, and this variable is nothing but a reference to a element in HTML whose ID is root. So if you remember in the index.html we had a div, right, whose ID is root. So this variable is nothing but a reference to that div, and below that, on the seventh line, here what we are basically doing is that we are telling the React transpiler that is we want to render whatever code that we have written inside this div whose reference is nothing but root element. So whenever we are building our React app, or whenever you are adding any content, or you're really coding anything inside your app, it will always appear inside this div, that is this div with the ID root. So this is something that you should generally never should change in your React app. This is something that is very boilerplate code, right? So you should never actually change this unless you are really sure about what you're doing. So there is something new here that you might have seen that is called as React DOM. So React DOM is nothing but the React document object model. So it is like a software that is responsible for placing all your HTML items inside your browser in which you are viewing. So it might really seem a little bit complex to understand with at the start, but once you get the hang of it, it will be really easy for you to go forward with it. So there's the last file which you haven't yet looked at, and that is called app.js. So can anybody tell me um, what this function is exactly returning? Okay, so Akhilesh is asking what is React DOM. So Akhilesh, React DOM is nothing but a React document object model. So the name is really complex, but what it basically means is that it is just a software that places all the HTML elements that you have inside your browser. So whenever you are viewing any website, that website will always be made of multiple HTML elements, right? So React DOM is the software that will make sure that all these elements are placed in the exact right order, as the order in which the website was built, so that you as a client could see the website very easily. I hope that answers your question. Okay, yes. So a lot of people have correctly said that this function essentially returns HTML, right? So this is nothing but a JSX file that we discussed some time ago. So you can see here that the extension of the file is not JSX though, it is just JX. So that is something that is actually allowed in React. So if you have a JSX file, then you can name it as JX and it will not be a problem. But you can also name it JSX. It really doesn't make a difference. So I'm just going to leave it the way it is, that is app.jx. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out these two lines and simply delete them. The reason I'm deleting it is because we simply don't need them, right? We need to build our own Linktree clone. I'm going to increase the spacing a bit in here so that we have a lot of space to write down our code. And once we are done that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go to to GitHub, and you can see here that there is a repository called Linktree clone. So I'll just share the link of this repository with you guys as well. This is essentially where we have already written down all the code of this project, and you can refer to this repository after the session to make sure if your code is correct, or if you're getting any kind of error, you can make sure that uh, you can figure out exactly what the error is. So once you go on that link, you click on the source folder here, and inside that, go to the styles.css file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just select all the content of this file, all the 83 lines of code. I'm going to copy it, and here I'm going to simply paste it in this styles.css file. So I'm going to delete whatever CSS was there before. I'm going to simply paste it here. And once I've done that, I'm going to do Control S to just save it. And the reason I'm doing this is very simple. It's because right now we are learning React, right? You guys already know CSS, so we shouldn't really be spending a lot of time worrying about the CSS when we can just copy it from somewhere. So once you have copied the CSS, just let me know in the chat box. Okay, Mayank, don't worry, we'll go very slow so that you can be able to do the same you can do both at the same time. Okay, great. So a lot of people have copied the CSS. Okay, so we'll proceed with the next part, right? So what we're going to do first is that in a link tree, you can see that at the top, we have this kind of logo, or you can say a profile picture. And below that, we have the name of the person whose link tree this is. After that, we have all the links. And at the extreme end, we also have a logo of Linktree. So what we are going to do is we are going to first be done with this top part and the lower part, so that later we can actually focus on the main part, that is building all these links. So what we are going to do is here, what I'm going to start with is a simple div element. And to that div element, I'm going to give a class name of user profile, because that's what essentially it is, right? We are going to give a picture of the user, and below that we are going to also write a name of the user. And inside now this div, there are two things we want exactly, right? The first is the picture, and the second is the name of the user. So can anybody tell me which HTML tag we have to use for it? A lot of you guys were there for the last session, right? The HTML CSS one. So which HTML element will be used if we have to put in a photo? Yes, img, that's correct. That is the image element. So it is a self-closing HTML element. And to that, we are going to give a source, that is the URL of the photo that we want to give it. So yeah, here what essentially we have to do is just give a link to any photo that's there on the net. So I'm just going to go to Google and type out random people. We just need a random photo, right? Great. So this guy's photo looks pretty normal. So I'm going to copy the image address here. I'm going to simply paste it here. So that's it. Once you have done that, just take this out on new line. Okay. Now, apart from that, there are also some more properties that we need to give this image tag. If you see that it's giving us a lot of yellow lines, right? So if we hover over it, it says that image elements must have an alt prop, which basically means that if the image is not there, then it will render some kind of a text there. So I'm just going to say alt is equal to image or user. Yep, that's it. And the last but not the least, we also need to give it some kind of a fixed width. So I'm going to say that width is equal to something like let's say 100 pixels. Wait. So that's it. If we click save and we go here, we can see that we have an image right now, right? But this image is not really a circular image. What we need is for the image to be a circle. So to do that, or okay, we'll come back to that later. Let's not really get into the CSS right now. Let's go to the next part, right? So below that, we want to and have the user's username. So to do that, I'm going to use the p tag, that is the paragraph tag, and inside that, I'm just going to type out my own name. You can type out yours. Since this is really a clone, it doesn't really matter what you type here. And I'm going to give it a class name of user dash name. Yep, that's it. So if you see from line 8 to around line 15, this part of our code is complete, and that is nothing but the header. So you can see that the photo and my name both have appeared here. So we are done with the header part of the code right now. And now it's time to go to the footer part, which is nothing but a simple image of the Linktree logo. So to do that, I'm going to again just use an image tag. And here we need to give it a source of the Linktree logo, right? So again, let's just Google that quickly. When you're doing this, make sure that you select a logo that is actually white in background. Sorry, that is white on the front. So this logo looks good enough. So I'm going to copy the image address here and I'll place it here. I'll also paste the link for you guys so that you don't have to search for it. Okay, so let me know when you are done with this much. Okay, is anybody having any doubts by this point? Okay, great. So let's continue with the further part then. Like we had done here, that is, we gave it some alt text and we also gave it a fixed width. So let's do the same here, right? We'll give it an alt text of something like Linktree logo, and we'll again give it a fixed width of somewhere around 100 pixels. So if you save all of this now and go here, you can see that the logo has also appeared on the bottom. And with this done, now we can finally focus on the main part, right? That is actually having all the links up on our link tree. So to do that, I'll just make some space here. Okay, so can you guys put in the chat box exactly which HTML tag would we use if we have to link something to our website? Okay. Okay, see, a lot of your answers are actually they're wrong, but they are technically correct. So yes, Vaishnavi said the correct answer, anchor tag. Even Ishan said the correct one. See, href is not really a HTML tag, right? It's a HTML attribute that you give to the anchor tag. So yes, Pranav said the correct answer. It's the A tag, that is the anchor tag. So that's exactly what we are going to use. It's a self-closing tag. And to this tag, then we need to give an href. That is a reference to the URL that you want to link everything to. Right. So let's say, for example, the first link that we want to put here is something like GitHub account. So I'm going to just say http colon colon. I'm just going to give my own GitHub account's URL. You can type in anything random. It doesn't really matter at this moment. And we are also going to close this link tag. And inside these two or inside this anchor tag, we basically need to give it some kind of so when the user clicks on that text, it will link to the URL that we have given here. That is the GitHub URL. So I'm just going to say GitHub account here. And last but not the least, we have defined some styles, right, in our styles.css here. So you can see there is a class called link container. So I'm just going to add that class here. This class name is equal to link dash container. Yeah. So once you've done that, just let me know in the chat box. Okay, so Mayank is done. Others, if you want, we can also go a little bit slow. Okay, so let's continue. So once you've done this, if you go here, you can see that we have got one link, that is the GitHub account. And if I actually click on it, it will just take me to a new web page. But you see the problem here, right? When we clicked on it, we went to the new web page, but we essentially just closed the earlier window that we had. So if I need to go back, I need to actually manually go back from the browser. So to avoid this kind of problem, there's another property that we need to give this anchor tag. And this property is something called as a target. So target basically, when we are giving a property called target, we are telling the browser that, hey, you can open this URL, but open it in a new tab. So to do that, we're going to say target is equal to underscore blank. So once we do that, we'll again save it. And now if we click here, we'll see that it opens up in a new tab, right? And we still have our original tab that's there. So with that done, we can see that there's again a yellow line here. It's not an error, but it's saying that it has a warning for us. And it says that using target without REL, that is relation, is equal to no referrer, is a security risk. So this is not something that really about React, but it here below target, just so that the error goes. This is something that's very complicated and related to web security. But what this essentially means is that no referrer means that whenever somebody is trying to hyperlink you to somewhere, that new site should not be able to access any data that was there from the original tab. So this is it. So we have one link here right now, right? But we don't just want one link. We want around 5 to 6 links. So one way we could do that is we could simply copy paste it 5 or 6 times. But imagine how large our HTML file would get. I mean, if we do just that, it will become like 100 lines without even much of any content. So this is where we enter into a very important concept of React called as components. So some time ago, you guys must be remembering from the PPT where we had basically divided our React app into a number of components. So that is exactly what we are planning to do here. We are going to create a new component, and we are going to keep reusing that component again and again without actually writing any more code. So to create a component, what we basically need to do is just declare another function, and I'm going to give the name of the function as link with a capital L. After that, a pair of brackets and a pair of curly brackets. So those of you who are experienced in C++ might be very aware of this syntax. And those of you who know Python, this is very similar to how you would define a function using the def keyword, right? And since this is JSX that we are working in, every function should return some kind of a HTML. So we are just going to say return, and inside a pair of round brackets, we are going to return some kind of HTML. I'm just going to return an empty div for now, and that's it. So now that we have defined this component here, what we basically want this component to do is exactly what we were doing here. We want this link component to act as a hyperlink, or we basically want to just return a anchor tag through that component, right? So what we're going to do is, instead of returning this div, I'm just going to copy all the code we had written here, that is between these two anchor tags. I'll cut it and simply paste it here and save it. And that's it. So once you guys are done with this much, please put a yes in the chat box. And if you have any doubts, you can also ask them right now. Okay, guys, we'll go a little bit slow. Don't worry. Okay, Mayank is asking, there are a lot of offline institutes that are charging around 50 to 60K for React training. No, absolutely don't do that, because React is something that's not actually very difficult. For a beginner, it's something that's really easy to understand. And you, 50 to 60,000 is just exorbitant for trying to teach React. Now, you can find many online courses on YouTube that are free, or you can also go to Udemy, and there is a course by Angela Yu. So it's a very popular course, so you should be able to find it easily. And you can instead just do that course for around 300 rupees instead of paying such a huge amount. Okay, guys, so should we go ahead, or do you guys want to wait for a minute or two? I'll type out the name of the course here. So this woman, Angela Yu, she is actually the person whose course that is. So it is actually a web development course. It's not just React, but she um, teaches all the concepts that are required for React, and in that there is also a React section there. So you can check that out later. So if you're lucky, you might buy it on a day when Udemy is really offering a good discount. When I bought it, I think it was for somewhere around 300 rupees. Which mentor should I prefer for this course on Udemy? I'm not sure I understand what you mean, Akhilesh. Mentor as in you have only one mentor on that course. The person who's created the course, they are the ones who mentor you. Okay, so is everybody reached this point? Because if you haven't, we can still solve any doubts you might have, because what we're going to do after this is a very important concept, so you really need to be completed up to this point here. So if you haven't, just put in your doubt in the chat section. We'll try to see what the problem is. Yeah, we don't sure, we'll upload the recording on YouTube within a few days. Okay, so I guess we can proceed to the next section now. So before we actually continue coding, I just want to get back to the PPT for just 1 minute, because we've got to do a very important concept in React, and that concept is something called as a props. So for those who have initially explored React, or you have read anything about React, you'll know that props is a very important concept that is used in almost each and every React app that is built anywhere. So props is nothing but short form for properties. That is, properties is something that defines a component. So here, but in the bottom we have two components, right? A parent component that is gray in color, and a child component that is green in color. So props is nothing but it's some kind of a information that is passed from the parent component to the child component. So you can think of it like how our parents pass on their genes to us, right? It's the same way here too. Parent component has some properties or it has some information, and it simply gives that to the child component. So if you ask us how that really relates to the Linktree clone that we are building, we can look at it here. See, the gray part is the app that we are building. That is the main app function, right? That we were coding right now. And this green box is the link component. This is the function that we wrote just a few minutes ago. The link component that is basically just returning an anchor tag. So what we have to do here is actually we have to pass a title and a URL for each link that we want to the link component, so that the link component can act like a template and dynamically render each individual link in our link tree clone. So this might be a little confusing to understand. So let's just go back here in the code. Yep, here. So here you can see this is our child component, right? The green box that we were talking about. This is the link component. But here you can see that we have already given the href to the a tag, and we are also giving it a title here that says GitHub account. But when we are building a link tree clone, we don't want just one, right? We want multiple. But if you want multiple links to appear, then it will be impossible, right? Because we only have one link function here whose parameters like href and title are already set. So what we essentially need to do here is that we need to take in two parameters for this link function. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to type something here called props. So a few seconds ago, we learned that props is something that is passed from the parent to the child. So this is our parent component app, and this is our child component. And parent is will be passing these props to the child, and the child will be receiving these props as a parameter. So this property props parameter is nothing but a set of different values. So props isn't necessarily a single variable like we have in Python or we have in C++. Props is actually consisting of a number of variables. It can even be empty and it can even contain one variable. It really depends on the type of project that you are doing. So when we have these props that are taken in by this function, then instead of passing in a manual href like this, we can set it to the href that we pass it from the parent component. So how do you access the href that was passed from the parent component? You open a set of curly braces, and inside that you say props dot href. So the error has disappeared, and here instead of manually giving it a href like github.com, now we are just passing in a bunch of props, and this props has a property inside that is called as href. In the similar way, here instead of saying GitHub account, we will say props dot title. Yeah, so that's it. We have successfully taken in props for the child component, and we are using these properties in order to set a dynamic URL for the anchor tag and also set a dynamic title. But here in the parent component, we haven't done anything, right? We have not called the child component. We are not using the child component, and we are not even passing any kind of properties to it. So let's do that here. In order to call a child component, or in order to include it in your parent component, you need to use it exactly how like you would have used an html tag. You open it up with a less than or equal to sign, and you type the name of the child component. In this case it was link, and once you do that, a forward slash and a closing html tag. and that's it. This is how you call a child component. So what happens is that when the transpiler is basically converting our code back into HTML and JavaScript, it will replace this line of code with this. So we are basically making our work easier, and we are making the compiler or the transpiler do all the hard work for us. Now, here you see that this child component is receiving again properties from the parent component, but here we are not, really passing anything. So to do that, to pass any kind of property to the child component, you write the name of the property. So in this case, the first property that we are passing is something called as a href. So let's pass it here. Href is equal to, and when we pass the actual value, so like we had the value of GitHub before, right? So I'm going to do the same. I'm going to type it out again and there. So whenever we are calling this child component here, we are passing a prop called href, and the child component here receives the props as a parameter, and it uses the href by props.href. The same way we passed href, we also need to pass a title, right? Because we see here that the props also has a property called title. So let's do that here again. Title is equal to GitHub account. And that's it. The error has disappeared. And if you go here, you'll see that we again have the same page. But one different thing that we did here that is that we abstracted this part of the code, that is the link part of the code, into its own component. So whenever you're coding, if there is any kind of error while you're coding this part, this error will not affect the rest of your website. If there is any error in this component, it will only remain in this component. This part of the app will not crash whatever you do. So that is one of the main reasons why we decided to use components instead of directly writing the HTML 4 to 5 times for each and every link. So are you guys have you guys reached up to here, or should we wait for another minute or two? Please respond in the chat box. Okay. Anybody else? Is anybody having any doubts? Okay, great. So now that you can see, we have successfully completed almost 80 to 90% of our app, but we still have only one link here. We need to have multiple of them, and here you can see that we have basically just created one link on a single line by using the component that we declared some time ago. But how do we do that for multiple links, right? So to do that, we need to first create an array of all the links, and using that array, then we can basically use this link component as a template. And by using it as a template, we basically just reuse the same HTML and CSS, but we keep passing it new values so that while each of the links they look the same, when you click on it, they will all go to different websites. So I will first start by creating an array at the very top, just after the import styles.css line that we have. I'm going to again go to the GitHub link that you guys had opened some time ago. And now go to the source and go to app.js here. When you go there on the third line, you'll see that there is something called as const links is equal to. So copy from here up to the 25th line where the array ends. So we are only doing this in order to save time. Ideally, we should be manually typing this out inside our code sandbox, but we do not really have a lot of time right now. So I'm just going to copy all of that and paste it here. For those of you who lost the link, I'll just paste it again. Copy it from line 3 to 25. What we just copied here is nothing but an array, and this array consists of multiple JavaScript objects. So this is one object, then this is one object, this is another object, and each such object contains two properties. One is a title, and the second is a link. So link is nothing but a URL of the uh, a URL of what we want the user to go to basically. So here there is a Google Drive link to my resume. Then here there is a Google Drive link to the GitHub. At the last, you can see that there is a URL to the website of our club. So we are going to basically use this array, and using this array, we are going to dynamically generate multiple links by using very less amount of code. So I hope you guys have copied the array into your project. If you're having any problem, you can put it in the chat box. Someone from our team will answer that. So once you have copied this array here, let's go down again and figure out what we have to do exactly. Now here we have this link component that we have called, right? But we need to call it for every item in the array now. So there is one way we could just, copy this line and we could paste it one below the other 5 times. But imagine if you don't have 5 links, you have something like 1,000 links. So you're not actually going to, copy paste 1,000 lines, right? So to do that, we need to use some of JavaScript's functions, and one of them is the map function of an array. So I'm just going to go down here and I'm going to just quickly explain to those who don't know what a map function is. So map is basically a JavaScript function, which is a looping function. So what does looping basically mean is that if you have an array of elements, this function runs for each and every element that is there inside the array. So let's say you have an array of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, great. So what does map basically do is that when we have this array called 1, 2, 3, 4, and we say array dot map, this map function basically accepts only one parameter, and this parameter is a function itself. So here I'm declaring a new function inside this map brackets. So we have passed one parameter here, that is a function. And if you guys notice, I have not given this function any name. It's just the keyword function that is followed by brackets and then curly braces. If you are doing something in C++, ideally you would have given some name here or something, but we are not going to do that here. Instead, what we are going to do is that inside this function, we are going to have a parameter that is called uh, that is nothing but every element of this array. So like I said, this map function will basically run for each and every element of this array. So whenever this function runs, it will itself take that element as a parameter. So when we say this, it basically we are trying to tell the React transpiler that run this function for each and every element in this array, and every time you run that function, the element will be nothing but a parameter of this function. So inside here, if I say something like return element into element, so what we are basically doing is we are squaring squaring each and every element that is there in this array. And if we try to console log the result of this much part of the code, we will get a resultant array that will be 1, 4, 9, and 16. So what just happened here is that this map function took a parameter as another function, and this function that was the parameter itself takes another parameter that is the element in each array, and it returns the square of each element. And once that is done, this map function basically just collects all the values that were returned by this function and stores them back together in an array. So when you're initially starting with JavaScript, this will be something that will seem very complicated. but it's really not. It's very similar to using something like a for loop in C++. So does anybody have any doubt with the map function? Because this is something that we are going to use here in the next step. Any doubts? Anybody? Okay, great. So let's go to the next step. In the same way that we had used the map function on this array of numbers, we are going to use that function on this array, which is nothing but an array of JavaScript objects. So to do that, I'm just going to type out the name of the variable first inside a pair of curly braces. Now, why are we doing this inside a pair of curly braces? It's because you can see that this is returning HTML, right? So if you have to write any kind of JavaScript code inside HTML, then you always have to do it inside a pair of curly braces. So here I'm going to first type out the name of the variable, that is the links. So links was an array of objects, and I'm going to say dot map. So you can see that the IntelliSense is already suggesting us that we should use the map function. And inside this, we need to declare another function. And this function will again take in uh, element as a parameter, let's say. And what we basically want this function to do is that for every element that is there in the links array, we have to return this component that we had declared earlier. And while doing that, we also have to pass it some props, that is the href and the title. So let's do that here. We'll say return link the same way we had done on this line, that is the 46th line. We're going to do the same thing here, except that here when we say href, we are not going to manually pass a URL here like this. Instead, we are going to do is inside another pair of curly braces, we are going to say element dot link. And in the same way, we're going to pass a title. If title is equal to inside curly braces element dot title. And we're going to comment out this line of code because it's no longer useful to us. So these three lines are all that's needed to basically reuse this component again and again, while every time using it passing different kind of information to it. So every time this function runs, it will run for a different element inside the links array, and every time it runs, it will keep passing a different href and title that we have declared here in this array, as you can see. So if we save this much of code and let's go back here, you can see that we suddenly have a appeared, right? We don't. So we have the resume link, we have the dribble account, the GitHub account, basically everything that we had so far declared in our array, we have all of them here. So that is how exactly we have used the property of components inside React, where we basically just reuse we reuse some part of HTML code, and every time we keep passing some different kind of properties to it. Does anybody have any doubts at this point? Or you guys want me to repeat any part of what we just did right now? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share a link of this code sandbox that I'm currently working on with all of you, so that if anybody of you is having a doubt, or they're getting an error at any point, but they're really too shy to put their doubt in the chat box, you can just have a look at this file and you can see what's exactly going wrong. I'll share the link here itself. Just have a look at the code, and if you have any doubt, you can also put it in the chat box. We'll just wait for a minute or two so that everybody gets on the same track. Okay, so I hope everybody's on the same track here. So this was really all that we have, that all that we basically needed in order to build our own Linktree clone. But if you see, there is one problem. Like there is a small CSS problem here, where these links have like really a lot of space between them. So that's one CSS error that we actually need to solve. So if you go in the CSS on line 40, you can see that there is a class called .link container. So we are basically applying the styles to the HTML element whose class is link container. And you can see on line 48, there's a property called margin, which is 14 pixels, which is like really, really huge. So I'm just going to reduce that and give it something like 8 pixels. So once that's done, you go back here, just refresh that. And you see that our problem hasn't been solved. So the main issue here is that all these link elements that we have just created, they are basically just around each other. They are not any kind of fixed around them. So in order to solve this problem, what we're going to do, that here inside these curly braces, we have the map function, right? Which is basically all those links that we just saw. So we're going to actually put that inside another div. I'm going to write div. I'm also going to give a class, and we are going to just call it links because it basically just contains a bunch of links, right? I'm going to cut it and inside this div. Now once you save that, and let's go back here, you can see that suddenly all these have come together again, and now it really looks nice. So you can hover around, see that there are some small color animations that we have done in CSS. So of course, if you want, you can explore more. You can and there with the CSS to create your own version of the Linktree clone, basically. But this was all to do in order to create our own Linktree clone. So once that is done, we really should be done with our session right now. But there are still one or two React concepts that I still want to teach you guys. So we'll just cover those quickly. We are not going to be using them in our Linktree clone yet because, frankly, they are very how do I say it? Very difficult to learn for a beginner, but it's also extremely basic that as a React developer you should be knowing it is. So it is something called as hooks. So I'm pretty sure that in the poster you guys must have read the word hooks, right? And you must have got confused because what is something like a hook doing in a programming language? So hooks are basically a type of you can say a concept of React that is extremely new. I mean, it barely came out like 3 to 4 years ago, and since hooks have come, React has completely changed, and because of that you can say that React has actually become one of the most popular web development libraries out there. So hooks are nothing but you can say they are some kind of a software that allows you to use somebody else's code. So I'm just going to write it down here. Software that allows us to use other code. So what that basically means is that uh, when you are using React hooks, you are using some part of a functionality without even knowing how exactly it works inside or how it exactly works under the hood. So React provides us with a lot of hooks, right? So there is a hook called as use state, which is one of the most popular. then there is use effect, use callback. There are a lot of them. I mean, you can go on Google and you can see there are probably hundreds or thousands of such hooks that are available for you to very freely use. And if you look here, there is one thing that's common among all of them. All of these begin with the use word. So that is something that is extremely important in React. That is, every hook must start with this use keyword. So what we are going to do is we're going to just quickly see how this hook works. That is the use state hook. So let's take an example for if you want to declare some kind of a variable in your JSX, then of course you can do it by the plain JavaScript way, right? You can do it using const or let or var. I mean, you know all these different ways in which you can declare a variable. But what basically happens is that whenever these variables that you have declared change, the React transpiler compiles everything again, because of which your website basically just reloads again. And when it reloads, these variables are again initialized back to the initial value, that is nothing but zero. So when you do that, it essentially becomes just useless, because your variables can never actually hold a value, because the page will always keep refreshing and you will constantly be losing those values again and again. So to solve that problem, we basically use the use state hook. So what this use state hook does is that it takes in a variable, it stores the value of that variable, and even when your website reloads, it still have that variable inside itself, so that you can use that variable again without that variable ever being resetted back to zero. So the syntax for using this hook is actually very weird, you can say. So I'm just going to type out here. So this might actually seem very weird, right? Because this is what I'm basically using is the array syntax. And after that, I'm basically assigning it to the useState variable. So this is how you exactly start to use a useState hook. So what we are basically doing is that when we call this useState hook, it gives back an array of two variables. The first variable is the actual variable that throughout your project, and the second is actually a function that is used if you want to change the value of this variable here. So whenever your page reloads or something in your website changes, the value of this variable will always remain the same as it was. It won't change unless you use this function in order to change the value of this variable. So this might be very confusing to get your head around it, but if you use it quite a number of times, you'll eventually stop thinking about how exactly it works and just blindly start to use it. So if I have to use this variable name anywhere, I can just say div, and inside the div I can type in the variable name and close another div. So if I use this inside my HTML, the actual value of the variable that was there will simply appear here. And if I want to change the value of this variable, I will simply use this set variable function, and inside this function I will pass the new value that I want this variable to take. So here we can see that in the use state we have passed something here inside these brackets, that is 0. So that is basically the initial value of this variable. What we are saying is that if the first time you load this website, give this variable the value of 0, and after that every time website reloads, don't do anything. And when you use this function, give this variable the value of whatever was passed here. So if I say something like 99, when I call this function, it will set the value of this variable back to 99, and inside your HTML this will now instead change to show 99. So that is really the basic concept of this use state hook. Similar to that, we also have the use effect hook, which is again very basic, and you'll find that it is used in almost each and every website. We have even used this, all of these hooks. I mean, use state, use effect, use callback. We used all of these hooks in order to build the GDSA website that many of you must have seen or even to build our college website, or even to build the ITSA website. So this is something that's really, really common. And the more and more you learn about React, the more and more you will start to explore these hooks. And eventually, once you know you're pro enough, you might even start to write your own hooks in order to do some kind of functionality that you might guys might have. So that was all from my side, guys. So if you have any questions at all, you can put it in the chat box, or you can even DM anybody if you want. We'll wait for a minute or two to see if anybody has any doubt or anything. Guys, so I just have to inform you one thing to you guys. So probably next week, or in the coming few days, we'll be hosting our third session of WebHunt, and it will be based exact on mostly databases and Firebase. So those in second and third year might already know what databases are, and third year students might have even used Firebase till now. But we'll be covering all of that again from scratch. So one homework, especially for FE guys, is that you guys have to do a little bit basic reading on what exactly databases are, and you need to understand the difference between SQL and no SQL databases. So I type it out here. What you guys have to do, just do a little bit of light reading on what these concepts exactly are, so that you'll be good to go for the next session. So Akhilesh is asking, which website should I prefer for learning React in deep? See, the best website to learn React is actually React JS website itself. It has one of the best documentation that I've ever seen, especially if you're a beginner who's just getting started and you don't want to really learn it through video courses, or you don't want to do it through YouTube or Udemy. You can directly go to the React JS website. So just type in React.js. It will probably be the first website. Yeah, reactjs.org. So this website has some of the best documentation and tutorials that you need to know to get started. So if you click on the tutorial here, it will give you step-by-step instructions on what exactly you need to do. How do you need to set up your PC for it, and what are the different concepts in React that you really need to know. So I'll share the link of this website. You can visit this. It'll be great.
Okay, cool. Um, Thanks, Satish. That was a great session, and I hope everybody learned something new today. And you can, since you uh, are all aware of the basic of React, you can build your own link tree, and don't forget to share the links. For the last session, we did receive a lot of screenshots from you guys. Some of you even hosted your website, your portfolio website, and you can do the same this time. You can build your own link tree, and don't forget to share it on your social handles and with us too. So thank you so much, guys, for coming today, and we'll update about our next session on the backend part of the web in the coming week, or in or in the next 2 weeks somewhere. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a good day. Yes, Vaishnav, you will share the YouTube recording with you guys within 2 days.